Today's movie starts with ll3r K1ll3d entering her best friend's house only to find the family dead. Her best friend's family was the ll3r family, and the ll3r family murders in 1959 shocked the nation and is the very same story that inspired Truman Capote to write his masterpiece in cold blood. Capote is an already established author known for his wit and literary style. When he reads this news in the front section of the New York Times, he's surprised by the story and sees it as an opportunity to create a new genre of literature, one that he called the non-fiction novel. So he calls the New Yorker magazine's editor, William Shawn, to tell him that he plans to document the tragedy. He packs his bags and starts his trip to Kansas to write about the crime. Capote arrives in Kansas with his childhood friend and fellow author, Harper Lee, who would later become famous for his own novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. Together, they interview the townspeople, police, and witnesses to the crime. When he reaches Kansas, he attends the news conference which is based on these murders. On this conference, Capote learns about ll3r K1ll3d, the girl who found the ll3r family dead. The first clue to Capote's realization that he's onto a bigger story than he thought is when he goes to the funeral home where the foreclosed caskets are housed. When Nellie gets an interview with ll3r K1ll3d, Capote wins her cooperation by sharing with her some intimate details of his long-time struggle as an outsider who was constantly misunderstood by others. The young girl identifies with him and hands over Nancy ll3r's diary. When Capote goes to Alvin Dewey, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation's lead detective, to gather some information, he doesn't really tell him much and just brushes him off. But still, Dewey's wife Marie is a fan of Capote's writing and persuades her husband to invite Capote and Lee to their house for dinner. During dinner, Capote talks about his childhood and the death of his mother. Then Capote uses this opportunity to ask Alvin further about the murder of the ll3r family. He also gets to see the horrifying pictures of the event. But on the pictures, something really puzzled Capote. The boy was killed while comfortably lying on bed and a pillow under his head, while the daughter Nancy has been tucked in. Back from the Deweys, Capote and Harper Lee start celebrating the news that Lippincott wants to publish her book titled Killing a Mockingbird. The Deweys, Lee, and Capote were having dinner when the murder suspects Perry Smith and Richard Dick Hickok were caught. Kansas Bureau of Investigation were able to piece together evidence which was corroborated by a fellow prisoner who ratted out the murderers for the $1,000 ransom money. During their trial, the two suspects forego a jury trial and have the judge hear and decide the case solely by himself. And Capote becomes very puzzled by this action. In order to have the adequate information about the case, Capote understands that he must be close to the murderers. So, he goes to a private sheriff's residence to talk with one of the suspects, Perry Smith. When he meets Perry, Capote is stunned by him, and he senses that there's a bigger thing to unveil from this person, and he also feels the sadness and loneliness of this individual. And as a result, he decides to expand the story to a full-length book. The trial date comes, and the jury decides that both the defendants are guilty and the sentence would be death. Following the trial and conviction, after which both Smith and Hickok are sentenced to death, the two suspects are transferred to Lansing Prison. But before they are sent there, Capote had to make sure that he is put on the visitors list so he can see Smith. And this plan works out for him. Capote gains continued access to the murderers. What really helped Capote achieve his plans, flattery, bribery, and a keen insight into the human condition facilitated his plans into gaining access to the prisoners. When interviewed about the new book he's currently working on, Capote describes his new way of writing as the non-fiction novel, which bases on the subjects of two men who broke into a quiet farmhouse in Kansas and murdered an entire family. He describes the life of these two men as one of the two worlds which exist. One being the conservative life and the other being the life of the criminally violent. On the next scene, Capote goes to the prison to visit Smith, and he realizes that Smith is trying to use the insanity plea by not eating anything. And so, he buys him some food and comfort. On another day, Smith chats with Capote about his mom. His mother abandoned him when he was a child, and he grew up in an orphanage. Since Capote had also been abandoned multiple times when he was a child, understands and sympathizes with Smith. On the next scene, we watch Capote having coffee with Alvin Dewey and telling him the title of his book, which was In Cold Blood. But Alvin is not happy with the actions of Capote regarding his help to the suspects. Capote begins to form an attachment to Smith. And the story of Smith's life, his remorseful manner, his emotional sincerity, impresses Capote, who becomes emotionally attached to him despite the gruesome murders. Perry, on the other side, is trying to use the insanity plea in order to be free, and he thinks that Capote's book will help him achieve that. But when he talks to Capote about the book, he tells him that he hasn't written a single word and that it might take him more time. We then see Capote spending the following years regularly visiting Smith and learning about his life. One day, he gives his farewells to Smith and goes to Spain in order to clear his head and write the book. He writes the first 3 parts of the book, accompanied by his partner Jack Dunphy. 1 year later, while in Spain, Poe gets news that the Kansas court has denied the appeal of Perry Smith and Richard Hickok, which means that they will die sooner than expected. When Capote gets back from Spain, he presents the reading of his book in New York and gets a very positive feedback. He also aids Smith and Hickok by obtaining expert legal counsel for them, initiating an appeal. This basically means that they'll stay off execution. Smith is very happy, but still, Capote is very frustrated as Smith declines to relate exactly what happened the night of the murders. On the next scene, we see Capote visiting Smith's sister. She tells him about her brother and sister who are dead. And after taking a picture of Smith and his sister during their childhood, goes back to Smith to get him to talk about the night of the murders. And after 3 years of tireless talking, Capote gets Smith to describe the killings and his thoughts at the time in great detail. So this was how things actually unfolded. As Hickok and Smith were in prison, they hear from another inmate that Herb Clutter was very wealthy and he had stashed a lot of money in a safe inside the family's home. The prisoner who told them this had previously worked for the Clutter family, and after being released from prison, Hickok and Smith immediately drew up plans to break into the house and get the cash. They went to the Clutter home outside Holcomb, Kansas, when 4 of the 6 family members happened to be home. Once entering the home, they realized that it was not a safe that contained the money, so they decided to wake Herb Clutter. Mr. Clutter gave them the little cash he had and said that there was no more, and so they decided to wake the remainder of the family and again search the house, confirming Clutter's story for themselves. And even after ransacking the entire house, they got no more than $50. And once the two searched all they could find, they assumed that Herb Clutter wasn't volunteering the right kind of information as to where he stored the cash that they heard about. From this assumption, Perry Smith decided to slit Mr. Clutter's throat and kill his entire family. After hearing the very vivid details of this story, Capote feels very down and depressed, and he stops replying to Perry's calls and letters asking for a new lawyer. Though initially an effort was made to provide proper representation and extend Capote's opportunity to speak with the killers, the appeals process drags on for several years. And seeing this, Capote feels like he's stuck with a story without an ending as he's unable to finish his book. Even now with everything in hand, Capote still must wait for the appeal process to conclude before he can publish his work. And over time, we see that Lee's best-selling novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, is turned into a movie. Capote is unable to share in the joy of his friend's success because he's too caught up drinking through his own misery. With the last appeal rejected, Smith pleads for Capote to return before he's executed, but Capote cannot bring himself to do so. But a telegram from Smith to Harper Lee thanking them for their support ultimately compels Capote to return to Kansas. Their last meeting before the procedure, Perry asks Capote to be there with them when he's hanged. This is one of the most touching scenes of the movie, as it shows how close Capote has become to Perry and how much he cares about him. Capote has invested so much time and emotion into Perry's story that he's become almost like a friend to him. As the two men watch each other, it's clear that they both know that Perry's time is running out. There, at the execution, Capote serves as an eyewitness to Smith being executed, and the execution scene marks the climax of Truman Capote's years-long investigation into the brutal murder of the Kansas family. Capote's reaction to the execution is complex and very nuanced. On one hand, he feels a sense of relief that justice has been served and the murderers have been punished for their heinous crimes, and on the other, he's consumed by guilt and remorse as he realizes that he's exploited the man's story for his own gain, that his actions may have contributed to their execution. Final scenes of the film are a stark reminder of the cost of this emotional involvement. Capote is clearly devastated by Smith's execution and unable to come to terms with the emotional trauma that he has experienced. The final shot of the film, with Capote sitting alone in his apartment, symbolizes the isolation and emotional turmoil that he's experiencing after Smith's death. In conclusion, the ending of the Capote movie is a haunting and powerful portrayal of the emotional toll that true crime writing can take on a writer. And that is how our movie comes to an end. I hope you guys really enjoyed this recap. I love doing this for you guys, and also make sure to leave a like, subscribe to my channel, leave me a comment, and I promise to see you guys on my next recap. Love you all. Bye.